Good morning. All right, we are in chapter 25. Today we're going to be covering section 2, domestic difficulties. Hold on here just a second. There we go. All right, when we left off yesterday, we had been talking about the presidency of Richard Nixon and how he had been forced to resign. In his place comes Gerald Ford, a man who had not been elected president or vice president. He had been chosen to be vice president, and that was part of his problem going into the presidency. Was he had not run in a national election, so he didn't really have the respect of the American people at that point as a whole. We also talked about that he was perceived as being a little clumsy, and that he had a Congress that really was not in his favor because he was a Republican and both houses of Congress were controlled by the Democrats. So we know that going in. And so we're going to take a step back now, and we're going to look at some things that are going on domestically, meaning within our own country. And then we'll get tomorrow into President Carter and then President Reagan. Okay, so the economy is going to become the nation's primary concern here in the early to mid 70s. The 60s had been an era of great prosperity. Looking back at them, that, even though there were many problems, there was the civil rights movement, there was Vietnam issues, so many different issues, but overall economically America had been in a pretty good place. We've been pretty successful. And then along comes some domestic difficulties that are going to send the economy into a tailspin. And one of those is the energy crisis. What happened was in October of 73, the Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, several others, attacked Israel. Israel's a brand new country. They just founded in 1948. So, they're less than 20 years old. The Arab countries attack Israel. And what does America do? Well, Israel's our friend, our ally, so we stand up for Israel. And we don't go to war, we don't send troops, but we send supplies. And we are verbally supporting Israel in this conflict. The Arab nations don't like that, so they stop selling oil to the United States. They call for an embargo where they're not going to sell oil to the United States. Well, today, a lot of our oil comes from, we produce it domestically. But at this point in history, that was not the case. We didn't produce a whole lot of oil at that time. So this Arab oil embargo is going to really affect us. It means that we don't have the supply that we once had. So we've got to figure out where we're going to get gas, because we all are dependent on gas, and prices are actually locked right now because one of the things that Nixon did was he froze prices. So they can't change the price, so they're going to have to limit the supply. Okay, so to reduce the long lines at gas pumps, a lot of state governments use various methods. Maybe the most common one was that you could buy gas on only on even or odd days, depending on the last digit of your license plate. I don't remember this. I'm too young for this, but it sounds interesting. Some gas stations suggested that customers make an appointment to buy gas. Others limited the number of gallons that you could buy at a time in a single visit. So there were various ways, but there were long lines at gas stations. And when they finally lifted the price cap on it that the president had set, prices soared. Now, when I say prices soared, we would think $4 or $5 a gallon, right? But no, in the 70s, the price of gas was 35 cents a gallon in 1973. But by 1980, it had reached over $1. So it was horrible. And we laugh about it now, but we didn't have the income that they had then. We have the ability to earn much more money now. But remember that the price of gas is going to affect more than just people going and coming to work. It's going to affect the supply chain, as in getting products to the stores. It's going to affect things like plastics that are made from petroleum. So there's a whole lot more to the price of gas than just the price we pay at the pump. Okay, so this map, this chart shows the price of gasoline and how it rose. You can see that sharp raise here from 78 to 1980. In 78, it's what, 62, 63 cents a gallon to over $1 by 1980. I do remember at times, I got my driver's license in the late 80s. I do remember paying less than $1. So the price is going to come down in the late 80s. And part of that is going to be the president is starting production of domestic oil, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so, but there's other things going on, not just the price of gas is causing problems. There's some other issues in the general feel of America right now, and one of those is environmental. Smog and automobile emissions had made the air quality really, really bad. And so environmentalists were starting to speak out about the industrial pollution in our water and in our air. Water quality was a real issue, even in like the Great Lakes region, because of all the industrial plants up there that had been dumping pollutants into those bodies of water. And those are fresh water bodies. Those are things that we can drink out of. So we need to keep those as clear as possible. So in 1970, the U.S. Congress created the Environmental Protection Agency that was going to help with things. And then they also passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And these are big pieces of legislation that they amended several times in the years that followed, but both of them helping to coordinate efforts to keep our water and our air clean. Very important for overall health of our nation. These acts also had other consequences as well, meaning economic consequences, because you can't just implement all of these things willy-nilly, the good phrase, and expect them not to have some economic repercussions. Companies that had been using coal as their fuel now couldn't use coal. They had to switch to oil or to some other means of producing electricity for the plant, and that costs money as well as cost time that the plant has to be off, not producing. So there are a lot of things that were ultimately going to come out of that environmental acts. Okay, moving on to stagflation. Now, typically in a society, we have, when unemployment is low, inflation is high. Inflation meaning the cost of things increasing over time. That is what that's the type of economy we've been in up until COVID-19. Now we have high unemployment. Relatively speaking, we're on the verge of high unemployment here. Hopefully it's only temporary and it'll come back down. High unemployment, so we need to make sure that the inflation is low. Typically, you don't have inflation and unemployment all at the same time. But when you do, economists call that stagflation. It's kind of a combination of the word stagnant and inflation, meaning our economy, our employment is stagnant and inflation is high. Okay, but there are three key factors that caused it to happen here in the 1970s. The first one is the energy crisis. It's going to leave us with a scarcity of certain products, meaning we can't get them. Bananas don't grow naturally in Georgia. They have to be shipped. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. The energy crisis is going to cause things to not arrive at the market on time, and when they do arrive, they're going to have a higher price tag on them. The second key factor is a large budget deficit that led the government to printing more money. Remember, we go back to Johnson, who tried to fund the Great Society and the Vietnam War both at the same time. And trying to do that without raising taxes is going to produce a budget deficit, meaning we can't make enough money to pay our bills. Remember, the government does not make money. It only takes money. and that money had to come from somewhere. And well, here they ended up printing money, and printing money is going to cause inflation. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry. The third factor in creating that stagflation is an increased competition in international trade. Other countries are recovering from World War II, getting products online and selling to the United States. And in 1971, we, for the first time ever, are bringing in more products to the United States than we are sending out. That's called a trade deficit. We want to always be sending more products out than we're bringing in. But today, in this economy, we don't do that. We have a trade deficit every year. But the 1971 trade deficit was the first ever. And Congress is at a dilemma at this point. They don't know what will work because nothing is working. So we're going to leave them hanging there and figure out what to do in a minute. First, we have to talk about some domestic difficulties. The rights movements. Various groups are calling for more rights. Now, the civil rights movement is definitely part of this. They're still fighting for rights, for more equal treatment for Black Americans. But we have some other groups that some are okay to fight for more rights, and some are kind of like, I'm not so sure that they need to be doing that. Let's talk about three different groups. First of all, the American Indians. The American Indians have been a mistreated group over time, and they're going to fight for more rights here in the 1970s as well. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to host a public protest, I got been eating too many peanuts, public protest at the site of the Battle of Wounded Knee in South Dakota in 1973. It's the 100th anniversary of that battle in 1873. And they're going to sue the United States government for land or for monetary restoration of the rights that they lost. And they do that to some moderate degree of success. The second group that's going to look for equal rights is the women's rights movement. Women often got less pay for the same job as a man, so they were fighting for equal pay. They were also looking for fairness because like in the 1970s, when a woman's husband died, his good credit that the two of them had protected their whole marriage was gone, and she was on her own. Whereas if a woman died, a man's good credit continued because it's in his name. Well, that wasn't fair. So the women are calling for fairness, which is a good thing. They appealed to the public on the basis of fairness to address these types of problems. But then within the movement, there developed a radical element. This is the women's liberation movement, or shortly called Women's Lib. This one's not so good. They proclaimed marriage to be a form of slavery. Betty Friedan was one of the leaders of this movement. She wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. Please don't read it. Don't go near it. Where she promoted things like free love, that women should be able to have sex with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Promoted easier divorce laws, promoted even lesbianism, and this is in the 1970s, okay? And abortion on demand. Those are the kind of things that the women's liberation movement sought to bring to America. And of course, in this decade, in the 1970s, we see Roe versus Wade, where most state laws restricting abortion were deemed unconstitutional. And by 1977, we're having more than 1 million deaths to abortion every year. All right, I think I'm going to have to stop there. This is actually the last couple of slides about domestic difficulties, but I'm out of time. So we will pick up there tomorrow and finish up. Thanks.